Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing King. Let's get right into it. King, also known as Fairy King Harlequin or the Grisly Sin of Sloth of the Seven Deadly Sins, is the king of the fairies and the protector of the Fairy King's forest and the fairy realm in general. His sacred treasure is Spirit Spear Chastiful, which he uses in conjunction with his inherited power, Disaster. His only his only living relative period is his little sister Elaine, the Garden of the Fountain of Youth, and his now wife, Deanne. But, minor spoilers, but I think everyone should have seen that coming if you're not caught up with the manga. You should have known this was coming. This is nothing new to anyone. Okay, so let's start with his past, shall we? King was born over 1,000 years ago from the sacred tree of the Fairy King's forest, and at some point he was chosen by the sacred tree to be the third Fairy King. Give or take 700 years ago, King was the ruler and the guardian of the Fairy King's forest. He used to live with Elaine and along with the other fairies, keeping up peace between them and the humans because he alone was strong enough to sort of keep entirety of humanity at bay, just because humanity is by far the weakest race in the Seven Deadly Sins world. During his time protecting the forest, King and Helbrum were best friends, but Helbrum really liked humans. King, on the other hand, sort of feared humans and, tried to keep his distance away from them and told Helbrum to do the same. Helbrum went out with some humans to meet them who promised to give them a few items in exchange for information about the fairy world. However, it was shown that the humans were only after the wings of the fairies, which could be sold for a lot of monies because it was believed to extend a person's lifespan, which it does not do. Okay, King then went out of the forest to save his friends. Despite Elaine telling him to please stop and protect the forest, he went in order to find his best friend and save him. However, after finding the dead bodies of the fairies, King stumbles upon a tall, armored man wearing an eye patch called Aldrich, I think I pronounced that correctly, who attacked him from behind and nearly ended up killing him. And due to the severe trauma, he ended up with memory loss and did not remember his past life. He was then saved by a young Deanne. Deanne later met a stranger who offered them soup. This is just a little minor story. You should all remember this from the anime, but just, a little something to go with it. Who offered them soup, and despite being a fairy and a giant, he wasn't prejudiced against them. King told Deanne to stay away from the man and to generally be cautious of humans. However, the man then later helped Deanne get over a cold by giving her some herbs, which is when they came to realize that the lifespans of humans were so much shorter because what appeared to be a few days or maybe a few weeks to them was several decades for the man, as he had aged from a young man in his 20s to an old grandpa, rather. Okay, and most of the next part isn't important, but eventually King gets his memories back. And then he finds out that Aldrich is still alive, which he figured was impossible because it had been several decades and Aldrich should have been long dead, which he was right about because it was actually Helbrum dressed up as Aldrich killing humans, or rather just going on a massacre spree in order to get his revenge. King then, in order to put his friend to rest, killed him and, put an end to his rage, for which he was then arrested by the Holy Knights for the crime of sloth. I mean, I don't know how you tell someone they have committed the crime of sloth. That's just interesting, but I don't even, whatever. The reason they called him sloth, they labeled his crime sloth, was because he was a king and he was unaware of Helbrum's mass murder of humans, and he turned a blind eye to his subordinates and leaving them in general and, stuff. Okay. And then about 15 years ago from the current timeline, King's sin eventually led him to become a member of the Seven Deadly Sins when the King of Leonis formed the group. Obviously being led by Meliodas, no surprise to anyone. King was introduced, when King was originally introduced to Ban, he was curious about his immortality. However, he sort of just overlooked the fact because, everyone in the Seven Deadly Sins was so interesting, not the least of which being Escanor, who was also a human but had the power that eclipsed everyone else's. So I assume Escanor's overwhelming strength sort of overshadowed Bond's immortality, and so he's kind of just let that go. Another cute story. Bon went through a phase of collecting stuffed animals where he ran around Leona stealing every stuffed animal he could find. And then when King found out, he was incredibly angry at Bon because, he believes that the stuffed animals were very important to the children and they were stuffed with memories. And so he stole all the stuffed animals while Bon was blackout drunk, and he returned them to the children from whence they got it, even fixing some of them, which were broken or had an eye ripped out or whatever. And then about 3 years after that, there's an Edinburgh story where the Seven Deadly Sins fight the King of the Vampires, but that one's really boring. King had surprisingly little to do in that one. Okay, so let's just skip that. About 2 years after that, at the day of the betrayal, King and the rest of the Seven Deadly Sins were summoned by the great holy knight Zarathustra to meet him at his castle. However, when walking around with his fellow members, he realized, and they saw that Zarathustra had been killed. And so after the incident, King went back to his hometown to see his old friends and his family, when he discovered that a bandit had stolen the hidden treasure, the Fountain of Youth, and killed the guardian saint, who was his sister, as mentioned earlier. King later found out that it was Bon who killed his sister and decided to take revenge on him by helping the Holy Knights, which was then immediately cleared up when they met because they're besties. Okay, his abilities. Okay, as a member of the Seven Deadly Sins and currently the most powerful fairy king in all of history, King is extremely, extremely powerful. He's powerful enough to overpower a great holy knight single-handedly, very easily. Being a fairy, he has demonstrated a number of unique abilities unique to his species, such as being able to fly or levitate, whatever you want to call it. The ability to change his appearance from a thin, young-looking man to a fat, huge, gluttonous pig. In that state, I suppose he should be the sin of gluttony, but whatever. And change his clothes at will, which is really just interesting more than anything else. As well as possessing great speed equal or maybe even surpassing that of Meliodas and Bon. And upon releasing his true power, Meliodas and Bon commented that his strength grew to an, quote, incredible level. This was later affirmed when he beat Helbram, a great holy knight, level combatant, while protecting all of the injured in the area, and then almost immediately defeated Dreyfus, one of the great holy knights of Leonis, despite the numerous injuries that he had sustained from his battle with Helbram. Despite his great power, King is incredibly weak physically. This was shown in the Visel Fight Festival. You should all remember that fight. That was bloody hilarious. Without his Spirit Spear Chastaful, he is incredibly weak and possesses no physical strength at all. However, with his Spirit Spear Chastaful, he has an incredible level of magical power to go with it, and in spite of lacking in physical strength, he has shown a remarkable level of durability in his second battle with Helbram. It was believed that King was able to control the sacred tree a long time ago, and with it draw out the true power of a fairy, but the tree abandoned King for an unknown reason, likely his sin of sloth. However, this was later proven to be false, as this sacred tree has no evil intentions at all, and it was King who did not want to utilize the sacred treasure's full powers. King later, as I stated, gained his true wings, and it was incredible, and Melascula states that his power became comparable, pardon me, I'm having a stroke here, to Gloxinia. Gloxinia himself remarked that despite the fact that King's wings had barely grown in, he can wield the Spirit Spear Chastaful on par with himself, and thus would be capable of surpassing the Fairy King, the first Fairy King, and even becoming the most powerful Fairy King in all of history, which he did. So I think that covers it all for King. I mentioned all of it. Just one more quick. We're 9 minutes in. Jesus Christ. I'm gonna explain his disaster power. Jesus, I sound like bloody Arnold Schwarzenegger. His disaster power. Okay, it is a power that is bestowed onto anyone with the title of Fairy King. This ability essentially grants him the authority to rule over the Fairy King's forest and allows King to exercise a complete control over life and death by altering and controlling matter at a molecular level. For example, he can turn a shallow scratch into a fatal wound, a minor poison into a lethal toxin, and a small benign growth into a cancerous tumor that can devour the entire body. And it also gives him complete control over nature, allowing him to manipulate various flora, letting it flourish and perish in moments. This power was originally described as the reason that King is able to completely draw out the mysterious qualities of the Spirit Spear Chestival. However, this was untrue. It was just that he simply possessed it as a side effect of being the Fairy King and being chosen by the spirit, by the sacred tree. So that covers all of it. Thank you so much for watching the video. We are 10 minutes in. I doubt any of you have made it this far in, but if you have, please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below. See ya.